Okay. So first of all, thank you all for coming out. Last talk of the last day. You guys are the real troopers for being here. Really appreciate it. I promise I won't try and keep you too long, and then we'll all go to the closing ceremonies after this. That should be a good time. So, before we get started, just a poll of the audience. Raise your hand if you've got a passion project that you've got bouncing around your head right now. Right? So how many of you have ever been in a situation where you feel like you've got a whole bunch bouncing around your head and you can't choose between them? Right? How many of us have been in situations before where you get started on one and you make it a few days or a few weeks in and it kind of just becomes nothing and it never goes anywhere? Right? Okay. So captive audience, fantastic. So I think at some point then, gauging by your answer, come on in. Come on in. All right, gauging by your answers then, I think at some point we've all probably felt like this guy.
Start having hats and shirts for surfers in Hawaii. Guys, I'm a millionaire. Who parties in Hawaii? What do you think, buddy? I can do something like that. Like a fucking shirt that says loser. Or, I don't know, really bad to talk to my hand. Or something like that, man. Those would sell. Or I don't think I would set up those ideas like a hat. A big old hat. You know?
All right. So I think, right? I mean, right, maybe not exactly. Maybe it included the near car crash, maybe not, right? But you've got these ideas just burning holes in your skull. And you don't know what to do with them, right? You kind of get stuck in this idea phase. So today, what we're going to try and do is get past that. And we're going to talk about how to go from concept to production, how to actually launch your passion project. And I'll try to give you some tips from a product manager who turned into a developer. All right, so as I mentioned, let's get past the idea stage. And what we'll look at is how to think big picture, right? Dr. Seuss style, all the places that your app can go, right? Then from there, once we've thought about that, let's slash that down to an MVP that we actually have the best chance of shipping. Along those lines, we think about what are the technologies that we should use that would help us get there, how to make milestones and track to see how we're doing along the way. And this one I think is really important, that a lot of times when these kinds of talks are done, that a lot of times is overlooked, is the emotional roller coaster that goes into this thing. A lot of times you just hear about here's this stuff, I did this thing and it was great, and this is actually one of the most important parts that nobody ever talks about. So then most importantly then, putting all that together, how do we actually take your idea and get it launched? So a little bit about me. My name is Guillermo Moratorio. I'm a software developer at Voalte. We're a medical communications company that's based out of Florida, and we deploy smartphones in hospitals across the country, both at the point of care and for caregivers outside of the hospital. I have been working with them for quite a bit. We'll get to that in a minute. There's my contact info. Feel free to reach out. So my background, I've been with Voalte now for about 6 years. I was employee number 43 when I started with them. And I started as a project manager. I was taking our product live across the country, flying to hospitals all around, and literally going from signed contract to in the user's hand, following the project every step of the way to pull all that together. Did that for a while, and then I got pulled into our product team, and by our product team, I mean I was the only product manager. And we had one product at the time, our Voalte 1 bedside product, and I was responsible with finishing up the tasks around with the product and the release of our second product ever, Voalte Me. So I did that for a while, and right around that time, that was on our 2.x platform. Right around that time was when we were coming out with our huge make or break for the company 3.0 fundamental rewrite, where everything was brand new. At that point, I created and ran our product operations team, and so the team that worked with me, they ran all of what we called controlled releases, so our beta sites and our launch partners, we call them controlled releases. My team ran all the 2.x controlled releases, and I was personally responsible for running the executive level timeline of this 3.0 launch. So at what point can we stop development? When do we start testing? How long should that go for? When do we start engaging our customers, and how do we deploy it inside of their hospital? Aside from working with our executives on doing that, I was also flying around the country to our launch partners and figuring out with them, how do we roll out this brand new technology that's never been tested before and try and mitigate some of that risk with them, and how do they move from 2 to 3? I did a few other things for Voalte along the lines, but those aren't particularly important to this presentation. What is, however, is that somewhere along the line there I said, look, what I'm really passionate about is software development. This is what I want to do. And I was fortunate enough that our executive team was supportive in that. I was able to move into our engineering team, and I've been doing that with them for the past 2 years or so. Outside of there, some of you might know me from Denver Script. Who here goes to Denver Script? At least some are regularly? Okay, great. So those of you that go probably recognize me as the guy who gets really excited when new dev tools come out. See, they've been there. I get really pumped about it because it's a really, really cool tool and we review it every month when new ones come out. But more importantly, my outside of work stuff I think is more relevant to this talk is I'm the co-creator of an app in the App Store. Let's move this down. There, that's better. I'm the co-creator of an app in the App Store called Campo Libre that I had the pleasure of building with a good friend of mine named Aaron. So the reason why I mention these things is because I was very fortunate in the time that I had at Voalte in project management, product release scheduling, that when it came time for me to build my passion project, I was able to draw on all these experience I already had and lessons I already had, some of them earned very painfully in real production scenarios with hospital executives, but we were able to take those things and apply them to actually how we got our passion project out the door. And I think it gave us our best chance of success, and glad to say that it actually worked out. So when we go through this today, what I'll be going through is some takeaways that you can actually use for your projects that will give you the best chance of success, and I'll try and illustrate some of those points with some examples of what we actually went through when we launched ours. Okay? So this is our app, Campo Libre Colorado is the full name. It's an app to help users find, save, and upload campsites all across Colorado. We're very proud of it. We had a really good time building it. If you have an Apple device, feel free to download it on the App Store. Part of the plan is that this winter work on the Android build, and by next summer, Android users will be able to enjoy it as well, but that's that. So that's our app. Enough about that. Let's think about yours, okay? So this is big picture time. So all of you that raised your hand said you have ideas bouncing around in your head, I want you to settle on one just for now for this exercise. And for those of you that didn't raise your hand and you don't have anything that you're thinking about currently, just pick anything. Pick any company that exists, Uber, Airbnb, whatever, right? And also, I'm going to be using the word app. This is applicable to any project, but it's easier to use the same word every time. So, this exercise we're going to go through, I highly recommend that you do this at home, and it's something you should set aside a good amount of time, like 30 to 45 minutes to go through this whole process. But today, for the sake of this exercise, we'll do a mini version, and I want you to kind of just start thinking about some of these things, okay? So think about that idea, think about that passion project you have in your mind, and this is, like I said, very big picture time to think about how far can it possibly grow? Think about what are some major functionality adds that you might be able to do to it. What are things that work behind the scenes that the user doesn't see that might make it better to work with? What are some major feature adds that you might add to it? Really cool bells and whistles that might make it a more interesting app for the user to interact with. And I want you also to think about breadth versus depth, okay? And so let me give you some examples about this to maybe kind of help you as you're thinking through this. With our app, for example, we're thinking about some of these things. We sat down, Aaron and I sat down, and on a big whiteboard table just started writing all this stuff down. I highly encourage you to actually write down all of these things, and we'll get to why in a second. We wrote down all kinds of stuff, like, okay, people need to be able to upload sites, that's obvious, okay. What about once the site is there, they need to be able to view the site details, okay, cool. They should be able to like click on a site, and then maybe they can send it to somebody else, and if they have the app, they can open it right away, or prompts them to download it. Things like that. What about, right now, maybe we do it where we're admins at first, but then maybe we get it to a point where it's totally community managed. So how would we do that? Like, we first need to have a ranking system, right? Like a rating system. That needs to get built in too. Write down all of these things and go through all of that. This is the point where you're brainstorming and you just write down everything you think of about what the app can possibly be. This is really important for two different reasons. Number one is you'll potentially be surprised when you've written down all of these things and you start looking at the ones you consider important, the clustering that comes together of what that app is might not be the thing that you thought it was going to be when you first concepted this idea. And it's actually happened to us. The way that the genesis of this application was a thought of, for very experienced campers who had secret sites that they held onto, but they only know about so many, and they want to interact with other very experienced campers and interchange them like trading cards, but not put in any kind of like public registry, right? That was the initial idea for the app. And then when we wrote down all of these things about what the app can be, we realized, you know what? In terms of the marginal gain for the community, for the user group, it's a much bigger bang for our buck for all the time we're going to put in writing it anyways, to make more of a general purpose, everything you need about camping app first, right? Helping people find sites, filter by criteria on what the site has, facilities like restrooms and running water, what kind of views that it has, what kind of accessibility. We're like, this is much better for a much larger audience, And then in a later release, we can do the thing about secret site exchanges, right? So when you're going through this, you might be surprised at what you actually land on when you've written everything out. That's the first thing. And the second thing is, this is a really good time to get excited. When we get to the emotional part, we're going to go through this, but when you're going through these projects, you have a lot of peaks and valleys and everywhere in between. You're only going to have so many highs. This is a free one at the very beginning of the project. You should really enjoy this one, okay? This is a moment that you want to be really excited, get really pumped. If you're building it with somebody else, you guys should really be like vibing off each other on how excited you are. If you're not building with anybody else and you're doing it by yourself, make somebody else listen to how excited you are about this thing. You're going to need this later, so hold on to it, okay? This is the part of the project where anything goes. Literally like lightning striking your brain time. Write everything down. Everything is an option, okay? So now at this point we're up here. Everything is great. Everything's incredible. We're going to build the best app anybody's ever seen on the planet ever. We've got that. Now slash all of that down and let's get it to a thing we can actually get out the door, okay? So now, you have this huge list in front of you, right? It's several dozen things are written down. What I highly recommend you do at this point is go through every single one of those and ask yourself these questions. Do we really need this on day one? Does this thing have to be in the application on day one, right? Would we actually hold up our release over this? If push came to shove, and we were like, I don't know if we will get this in. If it didn't get in, would you still release without it? Would you hold up the release over that? Would the spirit of your application be gone without this thing, right? So you don't want to hack things away and then give your app no meaning, right? And no spirit, no soul to it. For us, for example, if users can't view a map of all the available sites, then what the hell do we even build, right? So like that one's got to be in there, right? But something like maybe click and share and a nice little like fast share feature, we could probably do without that on day one. It's going to be really convenient when it's added, but we wouldn't hold up a release over that. And the last one is, would users not use your app if this thing wasn't there, right? Think about like Uber, for example, right? Like your live location on Uber, that's cool, right? That's neat that that's there. But if you weren't able to request a ride, you wouldn't even download the app. What the hell's the point of it, right? So think about those things. So when you're thinking about these things and you're going through that huge list that you just got really excited about, if you answered no to any of these questions, you have to cut that feature out, okay? That cannot make the cut. Something that I really want you guys to think about at this point, and when you think about any of the other risk management things we're going to talk about, and this is, please trust me, something that I learned the hard way in production with real products, right? Is that every feature that you choose to add that didn't have to be there is now going to tie you to blocker defects that you must fix, okay? Think about that sharing thing that I said, right? It didn't have to be there, but if we add it in, and all of a sudden now people use it, and when they try and do it, the app crashes, now we have to fix that bug, right? So unless you have incredible feature flagging and you just turn things off, you might put yourself in a real bind by adding a thing that didn't even need to be there, okay? So be very, very careful and very judicious about anything that you add past what absolutely needs to be there on day one. So we thought about the big picture and what it can become. We've scaled it down to the thing that it actually is the most, the best representation of what it needs to be on day one. So now let's talk about the technologies that we need to get this thing out the door. This is a really important time then to take a breath and be introspective and think about, why are we actually doing this? Because I think, as developers, these two questions I feel like we confuse all the time. Are we doing this because we want to play with new technology? Or are we doing this because we want to launch a product, right? They are two very different things. They can work together, but one of these two things is going to be more important for you in this project, right? If your goal is to play with new technology, then you should absolutely do that, right? And use GraphQL and use all these new great things, right? But if your goal is to launch your product, then in a similar vein of how we were looking at features, you should only be adding the new technologies that are absolutely necessary to get your thing out the door. Everything else that you add is more risk that you've added, more things you need to learn, and more that you need to maintain. So, when you think about this also in like a tech MVP kind of mindset, right? You can want to ship a product and enjoy learning new technology on the way, right? But you need to remember which of those two is coming in order. Think about your personal tech roadmap for your project, right? What are the things that are going to be needed and when, right? So for example, when we were thinking about backend, we said, okay, so for backend, we need to have something, obviously. People need to be able to store their sites somewhere, right? So we could have said, well, you know, let's make it ultra scalable and let's hand roll a database and have it, you know, in traditional SQL, and we'll do all this stuff and it'll scale to 1 billion users. Sure, right? But we're not gonna have 1 billion users. We launched this thing in June and we have like 30 users, right? So like, and that being said, like, even if like everyone who camps in Colorado used this thing, like, you know, how many can you possibly have? And even then, if you get to that point where something like scaling like that is a problem, you're in a very fortunate small group of people, right? Deal with that problem when you get there, right? If you start introducing these other risks of things that don't need to be there, you might not even launch the thing. Get it launched, then worry about some of this other stuff. Now, if your passion project, by its very nature, has an immediate need for scaling, then yeah, you should worry about that thing. But if not, take the most basic thing that you can work with and just do that so you can keep moving forward. Once you've decided, okay, these are the technologies that I need. All right, we have to have a backend. We have to have this, have to have that. Consider the community when you're deciding between them, right? So, and actually, you can take a step back for that roadmap thing. Again, we could have rolled it all by hand. What we went with was a Firebase real-time database, right? Because it's there, it's ready to go. And then for this next bullet, when you're then choosing between things that you are going to go with, that you know you're going to do, consider the community. So for example, we said, all right, we are JavaScript developers. We want to deploy to these app stores, Android and iOS, and we're not going to learn Swift and Objective-C or Java for Android. So we're going to be doing something like either Ionic, React Native, or Vue Native, right? When you got to that point, say, okay, this is a requirement. We have to do this to be able to ship. Then think about what are the communities around those things. This again goes back to that first question. Do you want to pick, now that you said I have to have a framework, is the one that you're picking because it's the most exciting one and it's the sexiest one that like everybody's really excited about? Or is it the one that has a lot of road time and a really large community around it? I can't stress this enough that shipping one of these things is the sum of 1 million little actions you have to take, right? Don't add more things to yourself than you need. If you have to use a framework anyway, you really want the wind at your sails for this. I cannot tell you how many times our lives are made so much easier because we picked React Native and Expo as an example for this kind of project, right? Because why? The Stack Overflow community was huge. Expo has a huge following on its own thing. Expo has its own Slack org that you can log into and chat with people in real time. Some of them are admins and core contributors who answer your questions right away, right? Really look into what does a community look like. It will pay you in dividends. It is if you have all these other people that can help you with it. And one other thing, who here is on Denver Devs? Right. If you're not, you should be. And if you are, then there's all these topic channels by language and by framework, right? You can go into topic React and be like, hey, who's worked with Expo and had this issue? Your chances are multiplied by the entire community around you to solve those problems. So it all comes back down, similar with our feature selection, to risk management. Everything that we add adds an inherent risk. So let's only add the ones that absolutely have to be there, okay? So let's keep it simple. Although it's not really up, I'm not even gonna read it back. Mike always says, KSS, keep it simple, great advice. Keep it simple, stupid, great advice. Hurts my feelings every time. All right. Roadmap, timelines, and milestones. All right, first thing, set dates, set deadlines, okay? The easiest way to miss a deadline is to not pick one, right? It sounds silly, but it's totally true. Forget this project for a second. Let's all think about that like really busy day that we had where we had to run 100 different errands, right? Think about how effective you are on those days where you just like knock out all these things. You're like, okay, at 9:30 I have to be here, and then at 10:15 I have to go there, and then by 11 I have to be at this place, and then the other day you're like, wow, I'm exhausted, but I got all this stuff done, right? And think about like those like lazy Sundays where you're like, all I need to do today is pick up my prescription at CVS, right? And then like 30 episodes of The Office later, you're like, oh shit, it's midnight, right? The easiest way to miss a deadline is to not set one, okay? So what you need to do is pick what those deadlines and dates are gonna be. And when you're thinking about that, let's think about your project specifically. Do you set a date that you need to ship and then you work your way back? Do you do a zero-sum accounting where you say, look, we don't have a fixed date we have to ship by, so let's just add up all the parts and then that's the date that we're shipping to? Another thing to consider is your product seasonal? Ours, for example, the only times that most people want to go camping in Colorado is between the months of like May and October, roughly. Some crazy idiots like me camp in the snow, but most people only want to do like May to October. So that meant that at the latest, we could ship in like June Otherwise, we're going to lose most of our target audience and when they'd be able to utilize it. So we said, okay, well, we started almost exactly a year ago in October. So like, okay, it's October, we're launching in June, there's our timeline, right? Like, that's it. So let's just figure out where everything else slots in to make that happen. When you're making these timelines, you have to factor in your learning time. You have to factor it in by technology. So we said, okay, here we are in October. We want to launch this thing in React Native. We're a couple of Angular developers, right? So that means that first we have to learn React, then we have to learn React Native, right? So let's set some time aside for that. So we said, okay, let's go from October to January and give ourselves to get really good at React and React Native, right? So now we have from January to October to get, January to June to get this thing out. Then think about your development time and by major feature, right? What are the big things you need to build along the way? And the important one that you can't overlook is the DevOps time. And I put DevOps in air quotes here because not every project is going to require true DevOps. You're going to need a great continuous integration, continuous deployment timeline or pipeline for every project. Some of them might dictate that by the nature of the project, right? Ours didn't need that, but when I say DevOps, what I'm referring to is what every project does need, however, is some amount of time baked in to get that thing off the ground, right? And get it out into customers' hands. For us, for example, it involved using and deploying in the App Store, which neither of us had ever done before. We had no idea how to go from a React Native build to an actual IPA file. Then, how do you take that IPA file and make it testable on your phone? From that point, how do you even go through the App Store submission process? What hurdles do we have to jump through? Making an Apple developer account. What if we get rejected? What's the turnaround time? We didn't know the answer to any of these questions, right? So because of that, it was such a huge risk and such a huge question mark. We said, okay, we're setting aside a month for this thing, just in case, right? So we wanted to launch in mid-June, so that's it, okay, so then back it up from there, mid-May, code freeze, that's when we start going through this deployment process, okay? So now at this one we say, okay, here we are in October to January is learning time, we back up a month from the launch date to May, so January to May, that's all the time we have to develop, right? So then all of a sudden you're like, oh crap, my like 8 months just turned into like 4, right? So it's really important that every feature you add is one that you really, really need, right? This is actually something that worked out really well for us. It's something that can help you manage both the mountain of work you need to do and also give you a sense of the progress that you're making. Track all of your work in some kind of ticket tracking system. You can use Trello if you like that. We just use GitHub issue tracker. It works fantastic for us. We just did defects and stories on there, and whenever we made branches, we named them after like the GitHub issue number, and it worked really, really well for us. It serves a couple of good things. One of which is that as you think about and you start some mental diarrhea of like all this stuff you need to do, you just add all these tickets for it, and just get back to it later. And then be like, so you have a day where you have a little bit of time, like, okay, let me knock out this one. And it gives you something you don't have to keep it all in your head. And the other thing I'd say is, even if you're working by yourself, and this is just a passion project of one, do weekly check-ins just to see how you're doing, okay? The really good thing about this is that you've set this date that you're trying to hit. With these weekly check-ins is a really good way for you to see what kind of a deviation you have from that plan that you've made. If you said, okay, we have from October to January to learn both React and React Native, and it's like 70-something hours of lessons, that was fun. Then, it's now December, and you're only 25% of the way through, right? Now, you have to start thinking about, okay, so do I need to put in more hours every night and on weekends? Or do I already feel like I'm maxed out and if I put any more, I'm going to get burnt out, and we have to push the schedule out, right? But it's really important that you're constantly course correcting and asking yourself these questions, because otherwise, you're going to get to the very end and you're off by months, right? This constant recalibration of what you're doing is a way that you stay honest with yourself and either continue pushing yourself or give yourself a break and then push out at the other end. You always want to be course correcting. You don't want to be like this guy, right? I love that commercial. So, constantly course correcting so that you know where you're going. All right, here's a part that I was telling you about that I want to make sure we address. This is the last part that we'll cover before we recap everything and then we'll get here. So, when managing emotions, right, I think that it's super important that we go over this because a lot of times in these kinds of presentations, like I said before, somebody will come up and they'll say, oh, we did this thing, we built this thing, or launched this company, or did whatever else, and it was great. And then you get to the point where you're doing it, and you're like, oh man, not everything about this is great, right? And then you start wondering if you're doing something wrong or whatever, like, no, that is totally part of it. And so I want to make sure that I explicitly state that it is a very big part of the process, right? With a passion project like this, you are the #1 capital in the project, right? Your own energy, your own emotions, and your own drive are the only thing making this happen, right? So it is hyper important that you manage where your head is at with this kind of thing, because you're the only one who's going to make it happen. It's not like you're at work, and if like someone quits, someone else gets fired. This is just you. You're the one doing the thing. And if it's just you and another person, it's only the two of you. So, that being said, once again, celebrate those highs, okay? You're not going to get that many of them, so when they happen, I'm sorry, when they happen, make sure you really celebrate them, right? Do a little happy dance, high five the partner you're working with, right? Call up a friend and like make them listen to how excited you are, right? Really, really dance in that moment and enjoy how good it is. Sometimes we make the mistake of just blowing right past successes like anything else, and that runs the risk of you not really getting the recharge to your batteries that you need from this really great moment that you had, okay? You just killed this blocker bug that's been doing really just like driving you nuts. You finally figured out why this weird crash is happening that you didn't even know what was going on. You are at the spot where now it's just time to ship. All these things are huge wins. Those high five moments, you need to really celebrate them. Okay, plateaus. This is one of the parts that nobody ever talks about, right? Plateaus are the part where you're not at a high, you're not at a low, you're in between, and it's just boring. It's just boring, and it's tedious, and it's not exciting at all, and this is the point of the project where you just have to power through. The plateau part of the project, the boring part of the project, is the #1 killer of passion projects, right? It's the point where you're no longer hyper excited, you're not really depressed either, but you're just like, all right, well, I'm at hour 32 of React lectures, and I've got 47 more to go, right? And you're like, this is never gonna end, right? And this is where you have to just be heads down, put one foot in front of the other, and just keep doing the thing, all right? This is the point where you have to push yourself and just power through that thing. When you run into blockers, which you will run into blockers, right? This is where I think it's important to do like what I call like fib breaks. I put them in quotes because you don't have to use true Fibonacci numbers. You don't need to get really technical about it. But I think it's important, like we've all heard, we've all done this, where you run into a blocker, you can't really wrap your head around it, so like, I'm gonna take a lap around the building and come back, right? We've all done that before, right? That's great. What I recommend is for passion projects, with a blocker, it's okay, this is your task. This is all you need to do is you need to figure out this thing, right? And so then you do a lap, you come back and say, okay, well, now let me just continue doing this thing. This is the thing that we need to do right now. With passion project, you are opting into this project, right? You're the only one working on this thing, right? And there's a billion other things to work on. So if you run into this problem, take a lap and come back, trying to just power through it's not necessarily going to get you anywhere. So you come back after the 15-minute walk, and you still can't figure it out, then extend it a little bit more. Take a couple hours off and come back again. Right? When you come back that time, start powering through, can't figure it out, take a couple days off that problem and come back again, right? Start powering through that, still can't figure it out, take off like a week or two from that problem and come back again. The good thing about having a million things to do when you're launching a project is there's a million other things you could be working on, right? So don't bang your head against the wall for the one thing that's giving you trouble when there's literally 1,000 other things you could be doing, right? And then, whether from some other life reason or from that stupid blocker itself, you hit the inevitable lows, right? I think the most important thing I can say with this is expect them to happen. This is not only a possible thing, this is a highly likely and normal part of this process, okay? And now that we've covered these three main things, I'm going to tell you the truth. You have about 5% of highs, about 5% of lows, and 90% boring plateaus, right, in between. But that being said, these 5% of lows will happen. Okay? So when they happen, let's think about some things that we can do there. First one I'd say is only work when you're engaged. Have your head in the right place and only dedicate the time to this thing when you're really feeling working on that project. There's a difference between being bored with the project, having to power through, and being like low on the project and just really not feeling good about yourself or about what you're working on. This is not the time to power through it, okay? Because if you do, then you're probably not going to write very good code because your head's not in the right place. And then you're going to get upset that you wrote shitty code, and you're going to start spiraling at how crappy of a developer you are, okay? So, take a breath, work on something else, right? And that something else could be anything. Go for a run, clear your head, and then only work on it when your head is in the right place. Again, you have a billion things to work on, so don't bum yourself out about the one blocker that you can't figure out. Go work on something else, get some quick wins, get your confidence back up and get excited again, and then keep working through it that way. If none of that works, bring in a ringer and ask a friend, right? And let me tell you a true story about this process that I probably could have done better. So, as I mentioned, we were using Firebase in the back end, okay? At this point now, we're about 80 or 90% of the way through our development. The app is essentially done. Everything is working. It's like, okay, it's time now to add auth to our back end, because everything in dev mode, it's wide open and that's fine, but we need to do some auth in the back end to get this thing set up. No problem, Firebase has been really, really good to work with. They have good documentation. Open it up, grab the most simple auth example they have, drop it in, nothing. Well, that was weird. Okay, I must have read it wrong. You go do it again, nothing, right? I mean, nothing. Like, nothing was going through. It was immediately rejecting everything, even the most basic auth things we were doing. I read the documentation 100 times, nothing. I made a Stack Overflow post, nobody could figure out why it was wrong. I reached out to our organization on Denver Devs, nothing jumped out to anybody. So what I should have done, right, was start working on something else instead, but I was so frustrated about this thing, like there's no freaking way, like it can't be this hard. The documentation is so straightforward. I just continued to pound at this problem pretty much non-stop for 2 or 3 weeks. Every time I sat down and worked on the same problem, and I'll tell you, seriously, I got so depressed that I couldn't figure this stupid thing out that I didn't write a line of code in our project for like another 3 weeks. I want to put it in perspective. Up to this point, I've been working on this project every night and weekend for about 6 months. Every night and weekend, never missed a night, right? And I was so down at this point, like really in my head, I'm like, well, that's it. Our project's screwed. Like, we can't launch our project with no auth, and nobody can seem to figure out what's wrong, and the stupid thing just won't go. And I was like so upset, like, well, it's not gonna happen. This 10% is gonna be the 10% that kills it, and it's not gonna happen. And I was just so bummed out that I did nothing on it for like 3 weeks. Then finally, waiting until I was like at least taking one of the points of my own advice, I got like, when I was like, okay, you know what, sort of pick yourself back up. A few weeks later, I'm like, all right, dude, we gotta get this thing out the door, so just figure it out. Work on something else. So I went, worked on some other stuff, got some other stuff fixed, started feeling a little bit better. I had a good friend of mine, I was chatting to him about it, and the good thing about when you bring in a friend is that at this point, you know the problem really well, right? Like, you know it really well. So I was like, hey man, I got this thing, I wanna freaking jump off a bridge. And he was like, oh, no, it's okay. Hey, you know what? Let's look at it together. I'm like, it's fine. We're not gonna figure it out. It's a stupid problem. But we can do that. He's like, no, it'll be great. It's so cool. I'm like, all right, okay, fine. I mean, it's a stupid idea, but fine. So he came over, and honestly, his excitement and his energy to be like, no, we're gonna do this thing. We're gonna knock this thing out was like re-energizing. And it was like such a good feeling. It's all right, yeah, let's do this thing. This stupid thing that it took me 3 weeks and I got literally nowhere. Not that I didn't figure it out, couldn't get past step 0. We figured it out together in like 3 hours. It turns out that the documentation, because I'll tell you the punchline, right? It turns out the documentation that I was looking at, we'd been working on the project for so long, and as you know, the JavaScript community moves so quickly. We were on like Firebase version 4, the documentation was like version 5. And I didn't even know, he's like, hey, I noticed that this is a different version of what you're looking at. And I was like, mother. So I deleted it, npm installed, and it worked. So that was fun. Do you ever have those wins that you're not even excited that you figured it out? And you're just like, you gotta be, hey, you know what, I'm glad this worked out. So that was great. So when we're looking at all this stuff, it's important. Remember the end goal, okay? Again, I've talked about the boring parts and the down parts, but remember why you're doing this. If nothing else works, remember, you're working on this really cool thing. You're gonna get this really awesome thing out the door. You had this fun idea, you've put a lot of time into it. It's gonna make, whatever segment that you're working on of user's life more exciting or better or more fun. It's gonna be a really cool thing. If that doesn't work, think about how much work you've already done. Like, I'm over here thinking about, well, this last 10% is never gonna happen. We had 90% of the app already written. Everything worked. That was fully functional, right? Try and think about that. And if nothing else, what are those highs that I told you about? Try and relive some of those, right? Try and remember how excited you were when you first thought of this thing. Try and go back and think about like all those things that you thought the app could possibly be. Remember that list where you wrote down everything? Go back to that list and look at that again. Be like, oh yeah, this could be a really cool thing. I just need to figure out this one stupid thing, and then we'll just get there, right? It's doable. You'll get past it. The lows really suck, but luckily they're only 5% and they do pass, okay? So let's wrap it all up and then bring it all together, what we need to do to launch. Get excited about the big picture, figure out what the thing can be, slash that down to an MVP, and always be thinking what you need to finally get it out the door. Always be the pragmatist. Be asking yourself all the time, does this have to be here? always be risk managing. Do we want to add this incremental risk? Is it worth what we're going to get back from it? Make a plan. Stick to that plan. You can revise it, but then stick to the new revised plan. Be constantly course correcting. Listen to your emotions. It's super important. Once again, you are the #1 capital in this project. Don't take that for granted. And remember why you started, right? Remember when you raised your hand, like, I have an idea. That's why you're all sitting here, like, oh, I have this cool idea, right? Get excited about it again. It's going to be great. And this, I had nowhere else to put it, but I can't stress this enough, so I threw it in here at the end. Be your app's #1 user, okay? Likely, you have this passion project idea because the thing that you're also happen to be passionate about, and since you're a developer, you can now build something for it, right? For us, we love camping, so every time that I went out camping, I brought the app with me, and as it was progressively growing, it got progressively better, but the 70 sites that we have in the app right now, all of them were uploaded through the app itself. None of it was inputted directly to the database. We used the app to do all of it for every single one. Every weekend that I went out camping, I used the app, I uploaded stuff. I took 2 full weeks of PTO, I just drove all around Colorado and literally spent hours and hours at a time driving forest trails, just uploading sites all over. And I would go, some things would go well, some things wouldn't. I'm like, well, that's really weird. So then I would drive down to the mountains, find a Starbucks, fix the bug, make a new build, and go back out to the mountains, right? Be your app's #1 user, and you'll find a lot of those weird edge case bugs that other people would see, and you'd find them because you don't need to like imitate users in some kind of scenario. You are the user in that case, right? So you will find those weird cases. And get that thing launched. Get excited, get it out the door. You can absolutely do it. It is a doable thing, okay? So, thank you all very much. Really appreciate it. Our app, Campo Libre, is in the App Store. Please check it out and let me know what you think. We're very proud of it. So yeah, with that, I'm going to take a couple of questions, and then we'll all go to close the ceremonies. Yes?
So very tactically, what does the weekly check-in look like? Like, what's the mindset?
Mm-hmm.
Are you sitting down at what table? What type of pen and paper? Are you on computer? What does your weekly check-in look like?
Yeah, great question. So repeat the question, like, what is the actual like tactical portion of that weekly check-in? That really like the ceremony of the event happening is way more important than how you do it, right? It's just like, did you do it? Like, did you check in and say, the main thing is, right, just look at what does our schedule say we should be at this point, right? Are we still on track to do that? If we are, cool. If we're not, then either what do we do to correct that, or do we need to update our schedule, right? And the best way to do it is to look at, if you can, to breaking it into smaller tasks. You don't have to go crazy with it, but I said a good example, for example, is like, okay, learning time. You know that you have this many hours of lectures, you've done this many, so do the math. Are we still on track or not, right? But it's more important that you just like do the thing, because it's an honesty check more than anything. Yes?
So, what if you have an idea for an app, but you were not a developer?
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Do you find somebody, or do you teach yourself how to develop, or?
That's a great question. If you have an idea for an app but you're not a developer, right? Do you teach yourself or do you find someone? They're both good options. It depends on where your interest is, right? Like, I mean, you can actually ask a lot of self-taught developers, that's how they became developers, right? Because they're like, I want to do this really cool thing, and I just didn't know how to do it, so I just learned how to do it, right? And if you ask people that are developers that were taught some other method, that's pretty much how all of us have learned any other framework or technology. Everyone, right? So like for us, like, I really want to learn React Native. Okay, well, we need it for this thing, so that's how we did it. So if you have the time to dedicate, it's obviously a much higher bar to then learn how to be a developer. If you have the time to do that, absolutely do that. If not, then think about what other things you can bring to the project, and you have somebody else who's equally excited who is a developer, then you guys can pair that way, and then you could bring some other strengths to it, right? Like, you could be the one who does all the design, or you can like do some of the other things, you guys can pair together on that. Yeah?
How do you get your first users?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It obviously depends on what your product is and what the app is. I'm a big fan of, coming from like my product release background, I'm a big fan of like soft launches and like getting like small groups feedback, right? So we did like a soft friends and family launch, and we just like gave it to all our friends and family. And we're like, here, go out and use it, and and tell us what you think. That's what I highly recommend. I'm personally, since we're not trying to make like, I mean, if it turns into something that's great, but we're not trying to make this into like a huge business, it's like a thing we just wanted to do. I'm a big fan of just like organic growth, where it's sort of like, I just mention it to people all the time. So raise your hand if I've like told you all my app before. Yeah, exactly. So I tell people about it all the time, and so then people are either like, oh, that sounds really cool, I'm like, yeah, check it out, and like, see if you like it, or they're not, right? But just sort of like word of mouth, that kind of stuff, and then from there, if you get to a point where like you feel like it's in a state where it can really become a thing, then think about doing some more like formal kind of like promotions and like, you know, Facebook ads or whatever else. Okay, last one, yes.
Oh.
No, it's okay, last
Sorry.
one. No, you squeeze right in there, man, you got it. What's up?
Do you feel it's better to be tight-lipped about your idea, and like, have you run into people that run into the situation like you're like 8 months into building it,
Yeah.
and then all of a sudden someone else launched something that's doing the exact same thing?
Honestly,
you
I-
scrap it and then or
Yeah.
pivot where it's doing something different.
That's a great question. So he's like, you know, do you want to be like really tight-lipped about it and tell nobody, right? Or you kind of tell everyone? You're worried about like if somebody's gonna like try and like launch it before you. Honestly, I mean, you're all sitting here because it's not that common for somebody to beat you to it, right? Like there's so many other things that go into building it. I'm not concerned. Someone's gonna be like, oh, that's a great idea, and they're actually gonna go out and build another camping app and add more sites that are better and whatever else. Like it's just not gonna happen, right? It's like, and it might, but the odds are so small. You know, like it's not something I worry about. If you have some like truly revolutionary idea that is like a market-changing idea, and the idea itself is the big thing, then sure, maybe you don't talk about it. But most of it, like most of the ideas that we all have bouncing in our heads are just like, oh, this fun thing, and it's more about executing it than the novelty, right? Okay, so let's cut it off there. We'll go down to the closing ceremonies. Trust me, especially after a couple of beers, I'll be more than happy to answer any other questions. But the last thing that I'll say, thank you all for the time. My contact info is here. I do want to point out that like, if you guys decide to go on this journey and do this thing and go through this whole crazy adventure, if you need to reach out and talk about anything, please do. If you need someone to give you a virtual high five, I'd be happy to. Or if you need someone to like, you know, just be there for you when you go through the inevitable that you will go through, I will be there to feel for you. Thank you all so much, and yeah, let's get to it.